Let me just think for a second. If the premise of the principles is that my experience is coming from thought in the moment rather than from something outside of thought in the moment, if I find myself innocently blaming something else, so when we talk about anxiety or even depression, so a lot of times you'll hear people talk about it like my anxiety keeps me from being able to go out, or my anxiety holds me back from being able to be productive in life, or my depression makes me not be able to get out of bed. And it has that sense like I'm innocently blaming something for my experience rather than thought in the moment. And in that process, I've somehow identified with something as if it's true rather than, oh, the way the system is that there's thought flowing through moment to moment. So if I'm feeling anxiety, it doesn't mean I'm not feeling that, but it's a thought-created experience. It's a thought-created experience that's just happening over and over again, because sometimes we just have habits of thought that when we get interested in certain types of thought, we get more of that thought. Thought grows with interest and it atrophies with disinterest. So if I were not as interested in it, or I saw it flow through and I didn't have to get so like caught with it, it would kind of go down the river, because that's the nature of it. But when we identify with it, when we somehow say like it's my anxiety, there's no room for it to go anywhere. It's like I'm innocently pressing the button to say, give me more, and I don't realize that. So when people start realizing the nature of thought, and that thought flows through, and anxiety is an experience that someone has when that kind of energy is going through them. But because the system is designed that it's always flowing, I don't have to get too bent out of shape about it. I don't have to be too fearful of it, because it's not coming from something else. Something else doesn't have the power to make me anxious or to make me afraid or to make me depressed. The only way I can ever experience any emotion is via thought in the moment, which doesn't mean I'm not feeling it. I can feel anything, but I don't have to be afraid to feel anything if I know the source. There's a real security or comfort or calm that sort of comes when you are clear, oh, that's the source. Doesn't take it away. It doesn't mean, oh, the goal is to never feel anxious again. But the system will reset itself more clearly if I'm looking towards the source rather than I'm looking towards a misunderstanding and blaming something else. And people, even within their mind, can create thought constructs that become a thing. And now I blame this thing for my experience the same way I would blame my past or my husband or my children or my boss. So I think the main difference is the perspective or the premise from which you're coming from. With anxiety, when people talk about my anxiety or my depression, there's usually a built-in, innocent, false belief that there's something wrong with them and they're broken and they kind of need to be fixed. Can you come fix me because I have anxiety? Versus the premise of the principles is that all human beings are innately healthy, working perfectly. The design of the system is totally working. We're emotionally, psychologically, spiritually healthy, regardless of the way we innocently use the God-given gift of thought. And we can think our way out of that experience, but when we see how it works and we see that we can innocently do that, our health kind of pops back up when we notice it. When we insightfully see, oh, I can think my way out of my health. But for my thinking, I'd be experiencing total connection and health and alignment all the time. Alignment with the source, with God, with where my experience is really coming from.
So you're saying that the source is thought, right?
The source is an infinite energy that's almost a formless energy that shows up in the form of thought in our mind.
And then the principles are based on thought, mind, and consciousness?
Yeah, meaning the principles are describing how any human being in any given moment in time can be having an experience. That there's a source flowing through, God is flowing energy through me, giving me an ability to think and an ability to be aware of what I think. And that's what creates my experience. And I innocently think it's something else that's creating it. It's simple. There's a simplicity to it in the sense of you can't See, it's interesting. It's not information. It's not like, oh, listen to my words and get caught up in my words and information and write it down. What are the 3 principles? There's an insightful revelation that kind of happens for people as they learn about this. And when it starts revealing itself to them, they kind of just start waking up to like, oh, that's where my experience is coming from. Like it didn't really look that way, but it is where it's really coming from. And when people start seeing that, instead of having to prove it to them, they kind of just have their own experience of it. And then all of a sudden it's like you start seeing it all over the place and you're like, oh. So what happens is, I just think people are not aware that we're thinking all the time. And people innocently identify with their thinking. And then they kind of wonder why they feel so bad. Well, we're not our thinking. You're way bigger and more deep and more essence than your thinking. Thinking is just something that we do. And it's content that's always flowing through and it's always changing. But if I'm identifying with it, I'm the idea man, or I'm the, troublemaker, or I'm the defensive one, or I'm the creative one. Like when we're innocently identifying with the content of our thinking, we kind of lose out on something much deeper. And a lot of people create a tremendous amount of distress because of that.
What is that deeper thing? And can you talk more about the godliness flowing through you?
Yeah. So the deeper thing is really like, what's a human being's essence? Are we really our thinking, or is there something deeper to a human being? So every human being, really, they have a soul. A soul is much deeper than thought. Thoughts come and go. Feelings come and go. Even behaviors come and go. Our soul doesn't come and go. It's directly connected to the source. It's kind of like envision, back in the day when we had radios, which is way before your time. We had radios, and it was like you wanted to get a signal to a station, and you'd like turn it, and you'd hear this like static, right? And once you kind of got aligned with the station came in really clear, right? It's like there's this alignment. When we're in alignment with the source, with God, there's this clear thing coming through, and we kind of just get to be at the effect of it, so to speak. And when we're kind of quote unquote out of alignment, as if that's possible. See, that's the most powerful thing of it. It's not possible to be out of alignment. Our soul is completely directly connected all the time. But we have the free will to create an experience as if we're out of alignment. And it's a thought-created experience that people don't see as thought. And if they did, they wouldn't get so sidetracked by it. They wouldn't get so bothered by it. Does that make sense? Like it wouldn't be such a big deal. And they realize like, oh right, the moment I'm not thinking that way, I'll be back in alignment again. So it's kind of like we can get caught in the static of this system innocently and then get lost. But really the static is just kind of thought coming in and I get lost. But the moment I'm not really so interested, it will pass through, because that's the design of the system. And underneath that static, the alignment is the essence of a human being, which is just more. So when you see people who are stuck in like a lot of obsessive thinking or compulsive thinking or worrisome thinking, it's like if you ask them, they would say, I know it's my thinking. Oh, I get this. It's thought in the moment. That's why I'm feeling this way. But it's really that's not even thought in the moment. There's this flow that is deeper, that I don't know how you'd say it's like no thought almost, but there's this energy. It's not content. The thought in the moment, the fact that we think is different than the content of what we think. And when you're pointing people towards that truth, the fact that we think rather than the content of where they think, there's just so much more leverage to help a person kind of find their health and their centeredness and their security, rather than keeping them focused on the content.
You're talking, it sounds like, if I'm getting this right, and like maybe in other words, is like you're talking about the awareness of thought rather than the thought. And it's like almost like you're pointing to the nothing, but by pointing to the nothing, in a way, it's something.
Totally. Impressively said, since you don't even have a clue what we're talking about. It's totally what it is. It's like, that's what consciousness is. Consciousness is your soul. It's and when there is that nothingness there, you really have everything. And we innocently cover up that nothingness with self, which is really just also a thought created reality. The moment I'm not in alignment with that consciousness, like you're describing, the moment I'm not in that alignment, ego is created. And that's just a thought created experience that the moment I kind of get aligned, the ego dies. And it is really that simple. It's like, but how do you share that with somebody? How do you share with someone to experience that sort of space where there just is what is, and I get to just be rather than trying to do it better. I love how you said that.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I was going to, because you're going to move a little?
Just right over there.
Look right here for me for a second. That's fine. I was only going to say is the what tends